The death penalty is a very, very, very polarizing subject, and very few people are without an opinion. Those who do have an opinion are very, very adamant that their side is the correct side. I believe that as a society, we've moved beyond it, and it should have never been legal in the first place. The death penalty can lead to innocent people being killed, and it does very, very little to decrease violent crime. There are typically 3 drugs used for lethal injection: pansaronium bromide, which causes muscle paralysis and respiratory arrest; potassium chloride to stop the heart; and midazolam as a sedative. Prisons have to buy these drugs from drug companies that make them, but most drug companies that do make them have been becoming more reluctant to allow their drugs to be used. In fact, they're taking legal action for prisons to use their drugs. Pharmaceutical companies, meanwhile, are taking legal action to prevent use of their drugs in lethal injection. Quote, because prisons can't use most effective drugs, they're using drugs that are inferior. In 2014, Clayton Lockett, an inmate on death row, received lethal injection and then visibly suffered for almost an hour before dying of a heart attack. Quote, he suffered visibly for more than 40 minutes and then died of a heart attack and suffered a, quote, blown bane after receiving lethal injection, quote. The state, however, blamed the executioner for being improperly trained and misplacing the IV. In July of 2000, Larry Swearingen was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Despite the subsequent amount of evidence that clearly exonerated him, he was put to death by lethal injection. Just last year, Dominic Ray, convicted in 1999, executed in 2019. He was innocent. Carlton Michael Gary, convicted in 1986, executed in 2018. Innocent. Robert Pruitt, convicted in 2002, executed in 2017. Innocent. The list could go on and on. In the past 10 years, 8 innocent people have been put to death, as well as copious amounts of people who were exonerated just weeks, in some cases days, before their execution date. Quote, if all death sentence defendants remained under sentence of death indefinitely, at least 4.1% would be exonerated. We conclude that this is a conservative estimate of the proportion of false conviction among death sentences in the United States. Quote, in the case of Robert Du Bois, the jury came to a unanimous guilty verdict and suggested the death penalty. Du Bois spent 37 years in prison for rape and murder until September of this year, when DNA evidence proved his innocence. He was set to be executed at the end of this year. In 2019, there were almost 20,000 violent crimes committed in Virginia, a state where the death penalty is legal. In the same year, there were only 7,300 violent crimes in West Virginia, a state where the death penalty is not legal. During the last 20 years, the homicide rate in states without the death penalty has been 48% to 101% higher than in states with the death penalty. The people committing these crimes are not thinking about the consequences. If they were, they wouldn't commit the crime in the first place. If the crime rate in states where the death penalty is not legal is lower, then why have it at all? It is doing little to nothing to deter crime there, and is a waste of government time and money. Critics argue that capital punishment does little to deter serious crime, has led to executions of innocent people, and is more likely to be carried out against minority poor criminals than white or wealthier ones. Public support for the death penalty is at an all-time low. Murder is illegal, so why is the government allowed to steal human life? Who is to say that a criminal can't change? By supporting the death penalty, you are denying a person's chance to change. We as a nation are better than this. Life is precious, and it should never be in the hands of another human being to decide whether someone deserves to live or die.